Hello and welcome to this learning module about getting started with Asura GRC. I am Laura McWilliams, your User Enablement Specialist and Onboarding Specialist at Salty Cloud. I want to give you an overview of Asura GRC and help point you in the right direction of finding some more resources. So if you've already had your onboarding kickoff meeting, this is going to be a review for you. If you're not a customer yet, please email info@saltycloud to learn more about how to get you set up with your own proof of concept installation of Asura GRC. This first module is kind of long. I'm just going to give you a heads up. I'm sorry about that. I promise the rest of the videos are going to be a lot shorter. You can use Asura GRC to perform any kind of assessment in your IT environment. Since you have full control over which questions are used to generate assessments, you could use it to assess basically anything. In practice, Asura GRC is often used to assess levels of information security risk and to achieve compliance with regulatory protocols, such as those listed here. Many of these have to do with documenting your methods for sharing and protecting private data of various kinds. And because data is stored on physical devices, there is an aspect of inventory control to Asura GRC as well. However, Asura GRC is not an inventory management tool. Although it is capable of being used to track inventory for the purposes of classifying the data stored on that inventory, it doesn't automatically discover assets. And you can either manually add inventory to the tool or have a network-based scanning tool automate the process. Asura GRC is a standalone product, so there's no agents running on any tracked assets. There are three possible groups of people who typically access Asura GRC. Those are end users, administrators, and possibly auditors. End users are only going to need to log into the tool occasionally to fill out surveys and possibly update information about inventory that they're responsible for. And end users who have higher levels of responsibility in an organization might also log into the tool to view reports, which are the outcome of assessments. All of the end users' capabilities will be limited based on which organizational units they belong to and which roles they have. And we're going to talk about that in way more detail in a later module. So based on their roles, end users are only going to see limited information. Administrators, on the other hand, have super user access to Asura GRC, which gives them access to all capabilities and all data within Asura GRC. They can manage information about organizational hierarchy, locations, and inventory, and they are responsible for building out assessments. There does need to be at least one super user for each instance of Asura GRC, and your initial super user instance will be created for you by Salty Cloud. Finally, auditors basically have read-only access to everything based on their organizational membership. This learning module is really geared towards administrators, so if you don't fall into that category, you probably don't need to view this. When you're just getting started with Asura GRC, it can be a little bit overwhelming, and sometimes people aren't really sure where to start. You know you have to do some kind of assessment, but how can Asura GRC help get you there? After you do some initial setup, you will perform an assessment with the goal of reviewing the results and likely implementing some mitigation strategies based on any issues that you discovered. You're going to also periodically need to update your inventory and organizational data. And most type of assessments are done repeatedly on a regular basis, so it's an iterative process. A lot of what we are going to discuss in this series of videos will be about that initial setup and customization phase. Our standard new customer onboarding process is going to help walk you through it every step of the way. Asura GRC supports three distinct different types of assessments, and they differ in that they have different types of targets. Each target type has a slightly different workflow as well. Organizational assessments are also sometimes referred to as internal assessments. And in these, the questions are targeted to a list of individual organizational units, along with the categorization of any host inventory objects assigned to those org units. App assessments have a very similar workflow to organizational assessments, but the questions target a single app, and it includes an overall classification of that app. Usually, app assessment is used for assessing internally developed applications. Vendor assessments, the final type of assessments, consist of questions targeting a single external vendor, and they're usually about just a single offering from that vendor as well. You might already know exactly what you're trying to accomplish with Asura GRC, but if you're new to using compliance tools, you may need a little more help figuring out what to do next. Usually when I put together a plan for a customer to reach a specific goal, for example, doing a JLBA audit, I split it into two phases, planning and implementation. Each of these phases has three related parts: goal setting, scoping, and then making policy decisions. So the goal setting includes figuring out what kind of assessments you need. Do I need to do organizational, app, or vendor? Do I need to do some combination of these? And then the next part is scoping. So for example, if I'm doing an organizational assessment, which org units should be included and who needs to be involved? If I am including any kind of host categorization, then I need to figure out which hosts should be included and, which apps or vendors, depending on the type of assessment. This last part about making policy decisions really depends a lot on where you're currently at in your organization. So you may have a pre-existing information security policy that covers a lot of details, like, for example, the different relevant information categories and classifications that you care about. Or you may not really have an existing policy, and so that may be part of what you need to develop because that's what you're implementing. In the implementation phase, you'll perform steps corresponding to those three parts of the planning phase, so goal setting, scoping, and making decisions. So with respect to goal setting, the first step is going to be choosing a framework. There are a lot of existing frameworks like CMMC, NIST 800-53, NIST 800-171 are some of the more popular ones that we see people using. With respect to vendor assessments, we work a lot with higher education institutions. So HECVAT is a really popular one that we use a lot. And if you're using an existing framework, a lot of times all you really need to do is let Salty Cloud know, and then we can import the relevant pre-built question objects for you. On the other hand, if you're implementing something that's more custom to your environment or something that already exists in your particular institution, then you may have to create your own question objects to reflect that. The next step of scoping, you've decided which units need to be included or which people need to be involved, which inventory needs to be involved. So now you actually need to pull that information into the tool. So import org units, set up the relationships between those organizational units, create user accounts and assign roles, and of course import any inventory that's relevant as well. You may also need to customize certain aspects of the tool, so like host or app pick list values. I have another video where I talk a lot about customization. I'll try to put a link to that here. And you may need to do further customization on your questions as well. So once all of this groundwork has been laid, now you're ready to start running real assessments. Next, I want to walk you through a couple of different workflows with the SORA GRC. Which one you use will likely depend mainly on the size of your organization and how your hierarchy is structured. This first workflow represents a common division of labor between administrators and end users in a large organization. So administrators will add all of the information about users, organizational hierarchy, and inventory into a SORA GRC. They may need to add questions and related content as well. Salty Cloud can provide sets of default questions for doing well-known types of assessments using existing frameworks like we talked about, but you may need to customize that somewhat for your environment. Admins then build an assessment. Once the assessment has been published, end users can then log in to fill out surveys. Each user will only see portions of the assessment that pertain to them based on their organizational membership. After all the surveys have been completed, organizational units sign off on the surveys, and when all of the surveys have been completed and signed off, the entire assessment is considered complete. Similar to the previous one, this workflow is suited to large organizations. The only difference between this one and the previous one is who is responsible for entering inventory data into a SORA GRC. In a very large-scale enterprise, it may not be feasible for administrators to know about all of the inventory that needs to be included in an assessment. This is particularly true where members are allowed to use personal devices. In this workflow, the administrator sends out a reminder to users before the assessment is created, asking them to log into the tool and enter inventory data. You may also have IT staff in each department assigned to do this task, or you could require all users to log in to add their inventory. The rest of the workflow is the same as before. Administrators create the assessment, push surveys out to the end users who complete and sign them off. This last example workflow is better suited to a smaller scale environment. In this case, the SORA GRC admins do everything, For this to work, the admins would have to be very hands-on in their environment. They would have to have really detailed knowledge about all the inventory that needs to be included in assessments, and also be able to know and verify the answers to all of the survey questions. Vendor assessments are a little bit different in that the surveys themselves can be filled out by anyone, even an external person, someone who doesn't have an account on Asura GRC. Also, you don't have to be a super user to create a vendor assessment. If the tool is configured correctly, any ordinary Asura GRC user who has the correct permissions would be able to create a vendor assessment. Usually, a link to the survey would be emailed to a vendor representative for them to fill out. Alternatively, you could also fill it out yourself in-house. We also have some customers who have pre-existing HECVATs that have already been filled out in spreadsheet format, and they just need to reformat that data and then import it into Asura GRC for documentation purposes. So where can you find more information? This is super important. All of the documentation is stored online, and you can find a lot of help in the tool itself. So many elements within Asura GRC have tooltips and help buttons, which then link you into the online documentation. In the online documentation, you'll find how-to guides, reference material, explanation, and tutorials. In particular, I do want to mention the API guide. It's geared toward advanced admins or advanced users who want to use the API. Everything that you do through the GUI can also be done using a REST-like API. And in fact, under the covers, the GUI actually invokes the API. So if you want to get started with the API, you may find that in addition to that API guide, it's helpful to simply use your browser as an excellent tool for figuring out how those API calls are structured. You would probably want to use the API for automating activities that involve adding or removing large quantities of data to or from Asura GRC. You've already found the YouTube videos. I would definitely check back regularly because I plan to be posting a lot more videos after today. And I also want to mention that I highly recommend, as you reach a more mature level with using the tool, that you do develop your own site-specific, user-focused documentation. Now, there is documentation geared toward users in the online docs as well. But the thing about the way people use Asura GRC is it tends to be very specific for the particular types of assessments that you're doing, which elements are included, so in other words, which org units are included, which types of inventory assets you care about. All of that tends to be very site-specific. And so what we find is that our more advanced, more mature users, or more mature customers rather, who've been working with Asura GRC for a while, tend to develop their own specific documentation, which they then provide to users. And so I really highly recommend that you do that. Since you're watching this video, you're probably really new to the tool. So this is probably something you want to put on the back burner and come back to in the future. And also keep your eyes open, because I'm hoping at some point in the future to make a blog post where I kind of give you some tips and some insights on how you can do that. Currently, all of the online documentation is stored in Confluence. You can use the link shown here to access the documentation. The idea is that this URL is going to stay the same even if we eventually one day migrate off of Confluence. And eventually the default documentation will be version 2. As of today, when I'm creating this video, we do have customers who are on several different versions of Asura GRC, and so there are multiple versions of the documentation. If you can't get access to Confluence for whatever reason, you can certainly request a PDF of any documentation you need directly from Salty Cloud. And in the future, it's likely that new versions of the documentation will be created. So I would recommend that you use the built-in help links from Asura GRC itself to make sure that you are connecting to the version of the documentation that matches the version of Asura GRC that you're using. This link is also one you want to keep in your back pocket. This is the link to Service Desk. If you ever have any issues where you need technical support or you need to report a bug, you can do it through this tool. You would need to do a one-time sign up for a free account. You can also alternatively just email support at Salty Cloud as well. If you already have your instance of Asura GRC up and running, click on the links that I'm including here to access additional learning modules. If not, I would encourage you to reach out to info@Salty Cloud to learn more about how you could have your own personalized demonstration of Asura GRC utilizing your own proof of concept installation. This is the end of my getting started with Asura GRC video. I hope it's been helpful. Thanks so much for watching, and I would love to hear from you anytime. So feel free to reach out to me directly or to comment on this video. Thanks a lot.